In a neoliberal world, money is no longer a means to an end. Money itself is the end. We start to think about profits for profit's sake and growth for growth's sake, rather than trying to increase our profits or grow to a bigger size for some tangible goal. We're just doing it to be bigger. We're growing to be bigger than we were last year. And the neoliberal crown jewel, so to speak, is GDP. That's the one metric that we use to measure not just our economic success, but it's also a badge of honor among nations. It's a show of political might to have a large GDP. And it's not just about the size of your GDP, it's about the growth rate of your GDP. So it doesn't matter if your GDP is 18 trillion or 19 trillion, it's how much did you grow compared to last year. GDP is so important in our neoliberal world right now. It's taken center stage. This entire coronavirus pandemic, how often have you seen news stories about GDP? GDP crashing, bouncing back not as high as expected. GDP is as important in the news right now as public health, it seems. That's what we're watching to determine when nations are doing better again. GDP is the one metric that we use to determine the health of everything. But all that it measures is our economic productivity. Anything that you're not doing, anything that you are doing that's not making money, I should say. For example, if you had a kid, if you're raising kids, if you're caring for your parents, if you're going grocery shopping for your family, if you're cooking dinner, you're cleaning up after you cook dinner, you're sweeping up around the house, you're vacuuming, all of these things, in the eyes of a neoliberal capitalist, you're being unproductive. You're not working. You are at leisure while you're doing all of these things. But obviously, staying fit, taking care of your family and pets, and picking up your dog's poop off the sidewalk, all of these things contribute to a more positive, healthy environment for everybody. So these things are productive, but they're not accounted for in GDP. So it's a very incomplete metric that we use to determine how well we're doing across the board. So there are a lot of other things that we can take a look at. And if we were to look at our performance in terms of poverty, in terms of education level, in terms of financial security, in terms of physical health, mental health, we can go on with a list of other things that also matter that are obviously indicative of how well you're doing as a nation. If your depression, suicide rates are higher than anybody else in the entire world, does it really matter the size of your GDP? I don't think so. In a neoliberal world, however, GOD is spelled GDP. That is the only thing that matters. What a nice little ism. I'll drink to that. GOD is spelled GDP. That's the neoliberal mindset. Growth is good, so anything that threatens growth is not good. And how are we going to keep track of our growth? GDP. That's what a neoliberal capitalist will say. And again, it's not just about our economics, unfortunately. GDP becomes a measure of success as a country. So everything we do internationally, our global geopolitics, is all based around growing our own economy. We need to have new markets to trade with, new people to buy our goods, whether through nice favorable trade agreements or whether we're just outright occupying some land. And this is not an old practice gone with the days of history. We're talking about when I was growing up in the early 2000s and the WMDs in Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that we went after as a response to 9/11, which we knew was completely unaffiliated with Iraq. And yet we go into their territory for some oil there. All right, we're going to get a little bit off track here, so we'll bring it back. But essentially, the main point of neoliberalism is that it's not just a set of economic ideas. Those same ideas have made their way into our politics. And so now everything we do on a global political scale is all about, can we continuously grow as a nation? So neoliberalism puts money above all else. Money is now an end in itself. It's no longer a means to an end. And because of that, war, New Age colonialism, mass incarceration in for-profit prisons so that there can be free labor to produce low-cost goods. All of these things these now become the means to the end of more growth. When growth is the end, we start to do a lot of really shady business in order to get there. And we should be thinking to ourselves, what are we growing for? What are we growing towards? What do we want to do with all of this money? Just have it? Why? Money is for spending on a quality life, and that doesn't mean yachts and private jets. That means vacations with your family, friends, and loved ones. That means being outside with your dog and a bottle of wine or maybe a couple fresh beers for a picnic. What do you want to spend your money on if you're not spending it on being happy? Money should not be a means to an end, but that's what it is in this neoliberal world. And so here we are, where profits are king, and everything we have to do is for money's sake. But we can change. So again, I warned that we were going to get a little bit cynical when we go down this rabbit hole of neoliberalism. It's hard to not be pessimistic when we're talking about all these things. And we haven't even touched on the Friedman Doctrine, which is why this idea took hold so strongly among economics. But I will wrap up by saying this. One of the consequences of neoliberalism is that we now associate capitalism with commerce. We think those two are synonyms. We think that capitalism and economics and commerce are all one and the same, that there can't be any other form because markets rule everything. And that's what neoliberalism would say. Not at all true. And we'll take a closer look at that. I think I've rambled on for too long, so we'll cut this off. Stay wealthy, nation.